All right, let's dive into a real legal mystery today. It's got everything: a disaster at sea, a fortune in lost cargo, and it all boils down to one huge question: whose rules actually apply when you're out on the open ocean?
Okay, so picture this. It's April 15th, 1964. You're in Issei Bay, Japan, and it's one of those mornings where the fog is just crazy thick. And somewhere in that fog, two huge ships are steaming right at each other. You've got the Philippine vessel Doñana Nadi, loaded with American cotton, and then there's the Japanese SS Yasushima Maru. And yeah, they don't see each other until it's way, way too late.
The results? Bam, a catastrophic collision. And this number right here, that's how much the lost cargo was worth in 1960s Philippine pesos. We're talking hundreds of bales of cotton just gone. This wasn't just about a shipwreck. This single number was the spark that lit a legal firestorm that would burn for years and cross entire oceans.
And that brings us to our first big question. You could call it the million peso question, or at least the third of a million peso question. Look, when that much cargo just vanishes into the sea, somebody's got to pay up. But who? Okay, so let's get to know the key players in this whole mess. First up, you've got the insurance company, Development Insurance. They're the ones who paid out the claim for all that lost cotton. Then, of course, there's the ship's owner, the National Development Company. And finally, the company actually running the ship, managing the voyage. That's the Maritime Company of the Philippines.
And right there, that's the heart of the problem. The insurance company is out a huge chunk of change, so what do? Well, they turn around and try to get that money back from the folks they think are responsible, the ship's owner and the operator. It's a simple question, really. Who's going to pay us back? But man, finding the answer to that question, that's what took years and years in court.
And this is where things get really interesting. Because this case wasn't just about pointing fingers and figuring out who messed up. Nope, it turned into this massive clash of laws. The court's biggest problem wasn't even about the crash itself. It was about deciding which country's rulebook to use in the first place.
So check this out. This is the pivotal issue. The court had two totally different paths it could take. If they went with international law, well, if the captain just made a bad call, a navigation mistake, then the carrier is basically off the hook. They don't have to pay. But if they used Philippine law and it turns out both ships were at fault, then both carriers are 100% on the hook, together, for all of it. You see the problem? Same crash, but depending on which law you pick, you get a completely different winner and loser.
So what do? I mean, think about it. The crash happens in Japanese waters, the cargo is from America and Japan, but the whole shipment was headed to the Philippines. So do you use the laws of the place where the accident was, or do you use the laws of the place where the cargo was supposed to end up? Literally everything, the entire case, depended on the answer to that one question. All right, so after years of legal wrangling, this thing lands in the lap of the Philippine Supreme Court. And now we get to the moment of truth, the court's final definitive answer. And boom, here it is. The Supreme Court laid it out, plain and simple. They said, and I'm quoting here, quote, "The law of the country to which the goods are to be transported governs the liability of the common carrier." In other words, it doesn't matter where the ship crashes. What matters is where it was going. The destination is key. And this simple idea created what we can now call the destination rule. It's a huge legal principle. Because that cotton was on its way to Manila, that meant Philippine law was in charge. And under Philippine law, remember, the carrier is responsible. So game over. The ship's owner and operator were officially on the hook. But hold on, it's not over yet. The ship's operator, MCP, they weren't going down without a fight. They had a few more tricks up their sleeve, a few more arguments to try and get out of paying. So let's see how the court handled these last-ditch efforts. Okay, argument number one was a classic technicality. MCP said, "Hey, we were just the manager, not the official ship agent, so you can't blame us." But the court wasn't buying it. They looked at the contract and said, this piece of paper says you have all the power of an owner. So the court's finding was basically, if you act like an agent, you're liable like an agent. Next, they tried this one. You're too late. The 1-year deadline to sue us has already passed. But this is where the court got really smart. They said, well, actually, that 1-year clock doesn't start ticking until the date the cargo should have arrived. And since the crash obviously delayed everything, the lawsuit was filed right on time. Nice try. And for their last shot, they said, okay, fine, but even if we have to pay, our contract limits our liability to just 200 pesos per bale. This is where the court delivered the knockout punch.
They laid down a massive legal principle. You cannot write a contract that lets you off the hook for your own negligence, period. Since the court found there was negligence, that little clause in the contract was totally worthless.
So in the end, the insurance company got its money. Case closed, right? Well, not exactly. Why does a shipping accident from the 1960s still matter today? That's what we're getting into in our final section, the real, long-lasting impact of this one case.
You see, the Doña Nadi case was way bigger than just one lost shipment. First, it gave us certainty. By creating that clear destination rule, everyone involved in international shipping now knows what to expect. Second, it hammered home responsibility. It made it crystal clear that ship owners and agents can't just shrug off their crew's mistakes. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it created protection. It ensures that if you're a business waiting for a shipment, you're protected by your own country's laws. And all this leaves us with a really big question to think about. In today's world where a single package can cross a dozen borders, who should have the final say when something goes wrong? Should it be the laws of the place where it happened or the laws of the place where it was going? The Philippine Supreme Court gave a very clear answer for this case, and that answer is still making waves in global trade today. Thanks for diving into this one with me.